In September of 2021, ESPN released their 30 for 30 film Once Upon a Time in Queens, a 4-part documentary about the 1986 World Series winning New York Mets team. The film came out in the final weeks of a remarkably disappointing season for the then present-day Mets. They were first in the NL East until early August, spiraled to third place by early September, and then just 10 days after the release of parts 3 and 4, they were eliminated from playoff contention entirely, all amidst a slew of other controversies on and off the field. The 1986 Mets have been milked dry. We get it. A very talented team fueled by drugs and alcohol dominated Major League Baseball on their way to their second World Series ring in franchise history. There have been several other documentaries and books about this team. There's a few more about the 1969 team too. And that's fine, there's plenty of good stories there. But in taking all this in, I am led to but one question. Why does a franchise so synonymous with not just losing, but utter humiliation, a team that falls flat on its face year after year in increasingly improbable ways, playing in possibly the biggest sports market in the country, seem to only have their victories immortalized? Winning is hardly what comes to mind with respect to the New York Mets. The 1969 run is legendary, and the 1986 roster may be a top 10 team of all time. But even those teams failed spectacularly in maintaining their success. Sure, some MLB teams haven't won anything, but the phenomenon that is the New York Mets eclipses wins and losses. The Mets are, more often than not, just as embarrassing off the field as they are on the field. We hear LOL Mets, Mets gonna Met, this, that, and the other all the time. But over their 60-year history, what has actually forged this cultural understanding of the franchise? Most Mets fans certainly know, but you may not. You're watching this right now in 2025, or 2026, 27, 28, etc., etc. But I want you to take a step back in time with me. We're currently on the cusp of the 2024 MLB season. The Mets, by most accounts, are taking time to reassess the team and be competitive by next year, after an extremely disappointing 2023. They have talent, but with the Braves and Phillies division powerhouses, their chances don't look great for a playoff berth. You, the viewer, my audience, likely already know what's going to happen, because it already happened by the time you're watching it. But I don't. As I wrote this script and am now reading it aloud, I have no idea what the 2024 season holds in store for us. So we're going to track this season, together, through the lens of the most humiliating Mets experiences in their franchise history. Welcome to Misery.
Today is March 29th, 2024, opening day for the New York Mets season. I'm here in the Marina parking lot by Citi Field, where the 7 Line Army is hosting a tailgate party. The 7 Line Army is a sort of Mets official fan club. They host road trips for fans to go see the team on the road, they have merch, etc., etc. I'm going to go around interviewing Mets fans today about their expectations for the season. Let's have some fun.
Let's go Mets! Let's go Mets!
All right.
This is how excited we are, bro! Let's make it happen!
All right, the Mets have had some underperformances the past few years. What are your expectations going into this season, and how might that be different from seasons past?
They're realistic. Obviously, we didn't make the big splash with a free agent, but we're going to probably win about 87, 88 games. We're going to contend for that second or third wild card position, and then we're going to surprise people, because once we've gotten to that place where we feel like we're going to add another pitcher, we're going to add another pitcher, and we're going to shock the world. We're going to win the wild card. We're going to win the World Series as a wild card entry. We're not winning a division, but we're going to start chopping up all the big boys. We're going to take out Atlanta. We're going to take out LA.
Yeah!
And then we're going to beat the Toronto Blue Jays in the World Series.
Quite a prediction. Do you have anything to add?
Let's go!
Let's go, Mets!
All right.
Honestly, I don't have much expectation for this year. I want to see some progress. I want Cohen to, follow through on his promise to build this team and for us to see that long-term plan actually happen,
It's liberating, honestly, though. It's like whatever we do is a plus. There's no expectation, so let's just run with it.
Going into the offseason, the Mets were kind of hyped up to get these big names like Ohtani and Yoshinobu Yamamoto. How did you feel going into the offseason about their chances, and how do you feel now after we didn't get either of them?
Well, with what's going on with Showtime now, I guess maybe it's lucky we don't have him and pay the money for him. But I'm disappointed that, Steve has all this money and he doesn't seem to be using it in the right ways.
I don't believe in them. Every offseason I get my hopes up and they never do anything about it. I thought they were going to get that Yamamoto guy, but I guess it's better that they didn't because he hasn't had a positive inning like all spring training.
Well, I didn't bet on them winning Ohtani. You get what I did there? No. Listen, there's always disappointment. But, they wanted to be closer to home. They wanted to be in LA. I don't want anybody in New York that doesn't have the chops to be here. I want guys who want to represent New York, who want to represent blue-collar families who, go through resilience. LA is the easy route. Anybody can go to LA and go to a team that's already been winning games and going to the World Series every other year. That's not us. We got to work hard. And this team here, you're going to see, we're going to shock the world. I don't want Ohtani. I'm happy with the guys we got.
JD Martinez, that's a new guy, right? Yeah. Going to be a generational talent.
Okay, that was actually my next question is how did you guys feel about the JD Martinez signing, and also what do you think that says about the Mets' plans for this season and the future?
I like the Martinez signing. I think it really transforms the lineup, and Pete's finally got some protection. So no, I think it's great look, and yeah.
Good signing. Hopefully Vantos tears it up in the minors, comes back up at a certain point because somebody's going to get injured and does the same up here.
It shows they're taking the season seriously. They're not giving up and punting the season away, which is good.
I don't think it was like that moment, but it shows that there's investment and a goal to move forward.
Well, I look at JD Martinez. I look at his age. He's a bridge. He's only signed for 1 year. I think that he'll give Alonso the protection we need. I don't really know, tell you the truth, which power hitters we have in the farm system, but I think for sure it'll give, as I understand it, he's going to bat Lindor second, Alonso third, Martinez fourth when he comes back in about 10 days. So I think he gives Alonso the protection he needs in order to have the kind of year we want him to.
What are your thoughts about Alonso's future with the orange and blue, and what will it mean to you if the Mets don't extend him?
I really do hope they keep him. If they don't extend, I'm still going to be a Met fan. There's been many players that we've gotten rid of, but home run derby can come on.
Yeah, he's my daughter's favorite player, so we need him to stick around. He's also a great personality. He has a lot of momentum for the team. He has a great attitude. He's always positive, so we need that. So he needs to stay.
I have his jersey on. All right, so that says enough there, but I really hope Pete stays a Met. And I think Pete wants to stay a Met too. So, let's make that happen.
If they don't, I will be crushed. I hope he's here for his career. He's one of those guys, he's like the next David Wright, if you will. I hope he's here for the next 10 years and he finishes his career here. He's our guy.
I think for Cohen's sake, he's got to sign him. I think the Met fans are going to turn on him. I remember the day they traded Tom Seaver away. It's still a day that I'm pissed off about. If I see Alonso walk, I think a lot of Met fans are going to be very upset.
The Mets wasted no time this season getting into the middle of some baseball drama. In the top of the 8th inning, Brewers first baseman Rhys Hoskins slid into Jeff McNeil's legs to break up a double play. McNeil took exception to this, and the bench is cleared. The call was ultimately upheld as a legal slide, and the Brewers went on to win 3-1. But there's a lot of underlying context here. First of all, Rhys Hoskins and the Mets have a history together. When Hoskins was on the Phillies in April 2019, there was a series where both Jeff McNeil and Pete Alonso were hit by pitches from Jose Alvarez and Juan Nicasio. The next day, when Hoskins came up in the ninth, Mets reliever Jacob Rame threw 2 fastballs behind Hoskins, a clear sign of retaliation. Then, the next day after that, Hoskins hit a home run off Jacob Rame and slow-trotted around the bases. And I mean slow-trotted, like the slowest home run trot since 2010. Bartolo Colon ran faster around the bases for his home run. There's also some dirty slide drama for the Mets. In the 2015 NLDS, Chase Utley, another former Philly but then of the Dodgers, slid into shortstop Ruben Tejada's legs to break up a double play. Tejada's leg snapped, and his career was never the same. That slide created the Chase Utley rule, prohibiting players from sliding too off target from the bag when breaking up double plays. The next day, Hoskins had himself a big day at the plate. A 2-run single in the first, followed by a 2-run homer in the third. When he came up in the 7th, once again, a Mets reliever threw behind him. Yohan Ramirez was immediately ejected from the game, and both he and manager Carlos Mendoza were suspended. Mets lose 7-6. Watching the final moments of this game, I couldn't help but think about how the Mets never seem to be vindicated in moments like this. Yes, targeting players with pitches may be a little archaic, but it's just as much a part of baseball as aggressive slides are. I think what's really the most frustrating is that the Mets can't even win these games. Of course, we saw it with Hoskins before, but it even happened with the Chase Utley situation. In 2016, Mets pitcher Noah Syndergaard threw behind Utley as retaliation for breaking Tejada's leg. He was also ejected.
Did he just kick him out? He threw behind Utley. Did they just kick Syndergaard out?
They did. That's...
Take him. Terry, get a handle. Come on, let's go. Come on, talk to me. Talk to me.
Tommy, that's fucking bullshit.
Terry, talk to me. Then you talk to me about it.
Then. Okay. You gotta give us a shot.
You know what?
You gotta give us
Terry,
a shot,
okay,
Tom.
listen to me.
Utley hit 2 home runs that game, and the Dodgers won 9-1.
Turn 2 in on the corners, and that's one. It's hit deep into right field, back at the wall, and a grand slam. Unbelievable as Chase Utley has homered twice.
The Mets lost again on Sunday, 4-1, and were swept at home to start the season. They'd go on to lose their next 2 games to the Detroit Tigers before finally winning the second game of their April 4th doubleheader, a dreadful 1-5 at home. But let's backtrack a little bit, back to opening day. There was one more question I asked those tailgaters.
It might be kind of a polarizing question, so you don't have to answer if you don't want to, but one of the angles of my project is how the Mets have this kind of uncanny ability year in, year out to tend to humiliate themselves in ways on and off the field. Do you have a time you remember, like the most embarrassing or humiliating moment to be a Mets fan for you?
For me, 2000 against the Yankees. Wow.
You don't elaborate on that?
Sweep.
Yeah, okay. For you?
I think anytime you go into a game where you absolutely need to win it, and you lose it as a closer in the 2000 World Series, that game set us back for that entire series. You're supposed to win with your closer, and he didn't do the job. And I think like Luis Castillo falling on his face. I think of Brett Brady recently diving for a ball and hitting his face on the ground. Like, people talk about LOL Mets, but these things are going to happen. They're going to happen with young guys. They're going to happen all over the place. But you know what? Like, I don't care about any of that stuff, because you know what? These guys are professionals. They get paid to play. Sometimes you're going to fall on your face. It's not how you fall. It's how you get yourself back up.
Benny Agbayani throws it into the stands with 2 outs.
That's a good one. No one said that yet.
Yeah, that I was embarrassed to be a Met fan that day.
That's a tough one. So for sure, it's deceiver trade. A second one that they embarrassed themselves. Nothing really comes to mind. I used up my Seaver one early on.
The Seaver one's good.
Oh, jeez. Where do I start? Maybe it's not. The one that stands out to me, I know it's happened a long time ago, was when the Subway Series game when Luis Castillo dropped the pop-up. I think about that every baseball season. I just hope that something like that doesn't happen. That's probably the one at the top of my list.
I think for me, it's Cespedes, the COVID year, just leaving in the middle of the night and not really saying anything. that kind of, sucked.
There's a lot you could say about Cespedes.
The year we collapsed and had that 12-game lead with 13 to go or whatever it was, and then we didn't make the playoffs. That was probably the time I was most.
It was like 2007.
Yeah, that year.
Choking to the Braves 2 years ago was particularly harmful. That was rough. It was 13 or 14 games up at the All-Star break. That hurt. But I mean, every year they find a way to make me believe by end of May, and then by middle of July it's over. So gotta roll with the punches.
There's a lot. The 07 collapse was super tough. 07 and 08 were tough because I was here over there for the last game of Shea, and we had hopes going into that game. I was at the game the day before when Johan pitched on 3 days rest, and
they were prime.
It was perfect. I brought my cousin and one of my girlfriends who were going to NYU, and they'd never been to a baseball game. That was their first game. And you're watching Johan. We were it's good. We're gonna win. Jimmy Dugan pulling the whole thing. And then the next day to be here for the last game at Shea, because I had season tickets at Shea, and watching that happen, and then to watch the ballpark close, it was just so bleh. And then 16 was also pretty tough during that wild card playoff, whatever they were calling it then. And I sit in the front row of the outfield and next to the apple, and just watching that home run just land right there, it was just you could feel your heart just literally just being torn out of your chest.
All right, 7 line here. We were at a game in Pittsburgh a couple of years ago, and we were up, I think, by 3 runs going into the bottom of the 9th inning. And Diaz gave up a walk-off grand slam to lose us that game. That was pretty tough, but he's turned it around. I have the utmost faith in Edwin Diaz.
Closing Shea Stadium down and getting knocked out of the playoffs. That's embarrassing.
I also have an Edwin Diaz story. We went to a game. We were up on the Phillies. I'm like, oh no, Diaz is in. Sure enough, first pitch, home run. Phillies tie it. But then Alonso won the game on a walk-off walk. So it ended up being a happy ending.
Okay, great. I gotta go when that dude got hit in the face with a.
Daddy.
Yeah, that. Talk about humiliation. I mean, come on.
Just sometimes when you wear the jersey or the hat and people see you and oh, I can't believe they choked or stuff like that. But I'm still a Met fan though.
The Mets have become particularly known for having high expectations followed by disappointing results. And that's putting it lightly. The team completely collapses, implodes upon itself, in highly dramatic ways more often than not. For most people, this likely makes up your cultural understanding of the Mets, as we've seen it happen in each of the last 3 years. Sit back and let me tell you why I hate the Atlanta Braves. In the offseason of 2021, longtime Mets owners Fred and Jeff Wilpon sold their majority shares of the team to hedge fund billionaire Steve Cohen. Cohen made an immediate splash, spending $341 million on perennial all-star shortstop Francisco Lindor. Lindor got off to a slow start with the Mets, but it didn't matter, because it's July 11th, 2021. The last games before the All-Star break have just concluded, and the Mets are first in the NL East, ahead of the Phillies and Braves by about 4 games, and in large part due to Jacob deGrom being the best pitcher in the world, with his 1.08 ERA. Watching Jacob deGrom pitch that season was awe-inspiring. He would go up, strike out 10 to 15 batters over 7 innings, and give you 2 RBI singles in between. But after his start on July 7th, deGrom wouldn't pitch again this season. After missing his next few starts due to forearm tightness, it would eventually, and I mean eventually, be revealed that he had a partial tear of his UCL. Around the same time, Lindor went down with an oblique injury and missed 36 games. Amidst other injuries and underperformances, the Mets season spiraled out of control. By September 1st, the Mets were in third place. They had spent 103 days in first place, the longest amount of time for any team to also finish with a losing record. To add insult to injury, the rival Atlanta Braves would go on to win the World Series, cementing the Mets as the only NL East team in the 21st century to not win a championship. Of course, it wasn't the first time the Mets had lost a great season due to injuries. The very first time it happened was way back in 1972. It may even be the first true Mets collapse ever. The Mets were playing 700-plus baseball all the way through early June and led the second-place Pirates by 5 games. But then, Rusty Staub fractured his hand after a hit-by-pitch, Jerry Grody had bone chips in his elbow, and several other players, including Bud Harrelson, Cleon Jones, and Jim Fregosi, all missed significant time due to injuries. On top of general regression by players like Ken Boswell, John Milner, Tommy Agee, and the newly acquired 41-year-old Willie Mays, the Mets eventually spiraled to third place in the second half of that season as well. In one of the last games of the season, Mets pitcher John Matlack gave up Roberto Clemente's 3,000th hit of the now first-place Pirates. But let's jump back to the 2020s. The Mets looked to make a statement in 2022 by adding future Hall of Famer Max Scherzer to their roster. And it worked. By June 1st, the Mets were a comfortable 10.5 games up on the second-place Braves. Lindor was playing better, Jeff McNeil was back to his usual slap-hitting self, and Scherzer was lights out even at age 37. But then, the Braves won 14 straight games, and were behind the Mets by just 2.5 games going into the All-Star break. The second half only saw the Braves gain even more momentum. By September 14th, the Mets were only 1 game ahead of the Braves after being swept by the 61-82 third-place Chicago Cubs. And they still had to play one more series against the Braves on the road. In early 2022, MLB introduced a new rule to the playoff structure. They added a third wildcard team. Because now the third seed in each league would be slated to face the third wildcard team, the first and second seed of each league would be awarded byes and be automatically placed in the second round. In baseball, the first 3 seeds of each league are whichever 3 teams won their division, in order of record. The wildcard teams are determined by whichever teams have the best record outside of the division leaders. If the Mets, at this point in 2022, were to win their division, they would have been second seeded behind the Dodgers and skipped the first round altogether. This new playoff structure made the fight for maintaining first place more important than ever, which is why everything the Mets had worked for all season, as had the Atlanta Braves as well, came to a head with this series. A Mets sweep here isn't even necessary. Winning 2 out of 3 would almost certainly protect their division lead enough as the playoffs approach. If the 2 teams end the season in a first-place tie, the Mets only need to win 1 game here to clinch the season series against the Braves, which is used as a tiebreaker. September 30th, Game 1. DeGrom on the bump, who just a season ago looked like the best pitcher since Bob Gibson. Tonight, though, he was no Bob Gibson. In just the second inning, Braves sluggers Austin Riley and Matt Olson hit back-to-back home runs off DeGrom that each sailed into an erupting Atlanta crowd. Braves shortstop Dansby Swanson would add a 3rd homer to the Braves' lead in the 6th inning, which would be DeGrom's last. Tylor Megill would give up 2 more runs in the 7th, and the Braves would tie the Mets season record with a 5-2 victory. October 1st, Game 2. Max Scherzer's turn. Scherzer had been the Mets' most dominant pitcher all year. If they were going to win any game this series, it had to be this one. And some early offense made that victory look promising. The Mets struck in the first, scoring Nimmo from third on an Eddie Escobar groundout. The Braves answered back in the fourth with a Matt Olson RBI single, but the Mets responded with an RBI single of their own in the fifth. But then, Dansby Swanson came up to bat and took the breath out of every Mets fan's lungs when he swatted a mammoth 432-foot 2-run homer to give the Braves the lead. And if Swanson's home run off Scherzer kicked our little Mets sandcastle to the ground, Then Matt Olson's home run the very next inning served as the rising tide, washing away any remnants of what had once stood. Braves win 4-2. 1 game ahead of the Mets, first place in the NL East. Like I said before, should the season end in a tie, the Mets only need to win 1 game here to hold the tiebreaker. So Game 3 is still important. As dominant as the past 2 games had been for the Braves, the Mets needed to forget about it and move on. Chris Bassett, who had been rock-solid reliable all season, got the start, but it all looked like more of the same as early as the first inning, where the bane of the Mets' existence, Dansby Swanson, cranked yet another home run. This time, though, the Mets responded more emphatically. In the second, Daniel Vogelbach homered to tie the game, and McNeil homered in the third to take the lead. 3 batters later, Vogelbach hit an RBI single, and the Mets are suddenly up 3-1. But in the bottom of the third, the Braves drove Chris Bassett right out of the game after walking in Arcia and letting up a 2 RBI single to former Met Travis d'Arnaud. The Braves would never relinquish their 4-3 lead in this game, instead making it 5-3 in the 6th after Matt Olson's 3rd home run of the series, matching Dansby Swanson. After being in first place by as much as 10.5 games on the Braves all year, the Mets were swept, and Atlanta took a 2-game lead. The season still wasn't over. The Mets had a series against last place Washington, and the Braves had a series against 4th place Miami. The Mets would go on to sweep Washington, giving them a 101-61 record on the season. The Braves would lose 2 out of 3 in Miami, giving them a 101-61 record on the season. But back in that September series, the Mets needed 1 win to hold the tiebreaker, and couldn't even get that. The Braves won the season series 10-9, and thus the Mets were pushed to the wild card round against the Padres. There, the deflated Mets lost in 3 games. Some may be averse to calling this season a collapse for the Mets, since they still won 101 games. But to be in first place by 10.5 games, to ultimately being swept by both Chicago and Atlanta late in the season, cements this season, in my mind, and many others, as a collapse. The Mets looked to bounce back in 2023 and made another big splash signing of Justin Verlander. Despite losing DeGrom to the Texas Rangers, expectations were still high. The Mets had the largest payroll in MLB history and just came off a 100-win season with their first playoff appearance since 2016. There was still a lot to be excited about. Many saw the Mets making adjustments and getting back into the playoffs easily. But it just didn't happen. Before the season even started, Mets all-star closer Edwin Diaz tore his patellar tendon during the World Baseball Classic. Diaz was a huge part of the Mets' success in 2022, putting up a 1.31 ERA and converting 32 out of his 35 save opportunities. When Diaz came in at the end of the game was essentially over. It was a massive loss for the Mets. Again, before the season even began. Amidst this injury and underperformance from key players like Jeff McNeil and Max Scherzer, the Braves continued their momentum and never let up first place. Even worse, the Miami Marlins performed much better than in years prior, and the Mets trudged to 4th, blowing up their roster midway through the season. That's where we are now, going into 2024. Now, if you can believe it, 2023 was not the only year in which the Mets failed spectacularly despite having a high payroll. Let's rewind to 1991, where the Mets had the 4th highest payroll in baseball. After coming off of 2 disappointing seasons in which they only narrowly missed the playoffs, the Mets found themselves only 2.5 games behind first-place Pittsburgh at the All-Star break. Now, it's important to note that there was no wildcard game or series back then, so the Mets had to make first in the division for a playoff appearance. If the wildcard did exist, the Mets would have easily made 4 straight playoff appearances, starting with their World Series run back in 1986. Still, being only 2.5 games back of first was not a bad position to be in. However, post-All-Star break, the writing on the wall became clear. For the rest of July, the Mets only went 8-14 and found themselves 5.5 games back of Pittsburgh. Then, August happened. August saw the Mets go 8-21, even losing 11 straight at one point. By the 31st, the Mets had plummeted all the way to 4th place, 14.5 games behind first. They would go on to finish 77-84, their first losing record since 1983. Manager Bud Harrelson was fired with a week still remaining in the season. It was a freefall remarkably similar to the Mets' collapse of 2021, although at least this team never held first place for very long. If 1991's collapse mirrored that of 2021, then 1992 mirrored 2023. The Mets brought in Willie Randolph,
who just came third in the American League in batting average.
They also signed Eddie Murray, who although was far past his prime, still had an all-star season with the Dodgers the year before. They traded for Brett Saberhagen as a third veteran pitcher to complement Dwight Gooden and David Cone. And last, but certainly not least, they signed Pirates outfielder Bobby Bonilla to a 5-year, $29 million contract, which at the time was one of the largest contracts in the league and the highest average annual value in MLB history. And it was well deserved. Bonilla had finished the 1991 season third in NL MVP voting, was an All-Star and a Silver Slugger, and posted a .302, .391, .492 slash line with 18 homers and 100 RBIs. The Mets waltzed into the 1992 season with the highest payroll in the league, and certainly even higher expectations than the year before. A slew of unfortunate circumstances struck the Mets throughout the 1992 season that sank them into a 72-90 fifth place record, and their fourth consecutive season of missing the playoffs. It was mostly injuries. Willie Randolph, Brett Saberhagen, Dwight Gooden, Vince Coleman, Kevin Elster, Howard Johnson, and John Franco all missed significant time to various injuries, but it was also general regression. Dwight Gooden put up his worst season as a starter. Saberhagen and Hojo struggled to play well when they were off the injured list. John Franco's injury slid Anthony Young into the closer spot, and he finished the season with a 2-14 record and a 4.17 ERA. And Bobby Bonilla's numbers fell in every category, aside from hitting one more home run than in '91. Being the highest paid player in MLB, Bonilla was the recipient of many boos from the Mets faithful that season. But don't worry, Bonilla was known for taking criticism well. Actually, let's talk about that for just a quick second. Remember in the intro earlier this episode when I said the Mets only have their victories immortalized? Well, that's not entirely true. There are two examples I can think of that say otherwise. One is Jimmy Breslin's 1963 book, Can't Anybody Here Play This Game?, which was about the Mets' dreadful 1962 inaugural season. The second came out exactly 30 years later, with Bob Klapisch and John Harper's 1993 book, The Worst Team Money Could Buy, about the 1992 New York Mets season. It was obviously highly critical of the Mets for their remarkable collapse. The book contained two stories involving Bobby Bonilla specifically. One was that, apparently at one point during the season, Bonilla started wearing earplugs to muffle the boos from the home crowd. The other story was that Bonilla one time called the Shea Stadium press box just to argue about an error that he was charged with, an example of his contentious relationship with the New York media. Klapisch was the sports writer that Bonilla threatened here. We're going to talk more about Bobby Bonilla a little bit later, but for now I want to fast forward to 1998. After finishing third in the NL East the season prior, despite putting up a respectable 88-74 record, the Mets made a huge splash in the offseason, trading for all-star starting pitcher Al Leiter and signing all-star first baseman John Olerud to a 2-year deal after trading for him the year before. And then, early in the 98 season on May 22nd, the Mets traded for all-star catcher Mike Piazza. The Mets surged from then on, and especially after the All-Star break. While the first-place Braves were impossibly far ahead, by the end of August, the second-place Mets were still contending for the NL wildcard spot. The wildcard was introduced in 1994, and until 2012, there was only one wildcard spot per league. Going into the final week of the season, the Mets were tied with the Chicago Cubs for that spot. It would be a week full of out-of-town scoreboard watching for Mets fans everywhere. September 20th. A Mets win versus the Marlins and a Cubs loss to the Reds puts the Mets one game ahead in the race. September 21st. The Mets and Cubs both have off days, but a San Francisco Giants win puts them at just 3.5 games behind the Mets. September 22nd. Mets lose to Montreal. Cubs win against Milwaukee. Wildcard position is tied, and another Giants win puts them at just 2.5 games behind. September 23rd, Mets lose to Montreal again, but the Cubs lose this time too. Giants win, still tied. Giants 1.5 games back. September 24th, Mets and Cubs off day. Giants win, half a game back. September 25th, Mets and Cubs lose again. Giants win, 3-way tie for the wild card at 88 and 72. It's September 26th. The Mets are in Atlanta fighting for their lives against a Braves team that is 18 games ahead of them for first in the NL East. They just came off a nail-biting 5-6 loss yesterday, but are now starting their ace today in Al Leiter. About 800 miles away, Chicago is in an identical situation, fighting to keep their playoff hopes alive against their 12.5-game division leader Houston Astros. But they're not starting their ace today. They're starting Mark Clark. Mark Clark, to this point in the season, has gone 8-14 with a 5.00 ERA. The Giants have caught up to this point, benefiting from a much easier schedule. They've now won 5 games in a row against the bottom-feeding Colorado Rockies and Pittsburgh Pirates. They're starting Hall of Famer Oral Hershiser today, and they're going to cruise to an easy 8-4 win. Houston scores early on Mark Clark, but he settles down. That would be the only run he allows this game. The Cubs were able to respond, and Rod Beck converts his 50th save of the season. Chicago wins 3-2. Mark Clark, with 8 full innings of 1-run ball, lowers his 5 ERA to 4.84. The Mets-Braves game was scoreless after 4 innings. A pitcher's duel was brewing between Leiter and Tom Glavine. Surprisingly, though, despite pitching a great game, Glavine was pinch hit for in the 5th, opening up a perfect opportunity for the Mets to strike. Instead, Braves reliever Denny Neagle shut down the Mets for 2 straight innings, and Leiter let up 3 runs. Mets were shut out 4-0. Cubs and Giants tied, Mets 1 game back. Going into the last game of the season, the Mets could at least force a 3-way tie for the wild card if they win but the Cubs and Giants lose. But it was never going to happen against the Braves. Funny enough, the Cubs and Giants did both lose that day, but it didn't matter. The Cubs would go on to beat the Giants in a Game 163 tiebreaker and clinch the National League wild card. Now, I'm gonna get a little off topic from Mets collapses per se, but just bear with me here. You'll understand why soon enough. 1999 was a much better year for the Mets, as they powered to a 97-66 record, winning the National League wildcard tiebreaker against the Cincinnati Reds. And it was, in no thanks to Bobby Bonilla, who the Mets inexplicably brought back in the 1998 offseason. Bonilla put up a complete stinker in 99, batting 160, 277, 303 in just 60 games, as he was relegated to a bench piece. Bonilla's Mets career came to a head with a moment during the NLCS against the Braves, where he and Rickey Henderson played cards in the clubhouse as the Mets lost Game 6 in extras. The Mets, disappointed in Bonilla's season to say the least, chose to release him at the end of the year, but they still owed him $5.9 million on his contract. The Mets and Bonilla's agent together came up with a plan. The Mets would defer their payments to Bonilla until July 1st, 2011, where they would start paying him $1.19 million a year until 2035. This came out to roughly an 8% interest rate, which the Mets were okay with. Fred Wilpon, the Mets owner, was okay with this because he had made some very sound, safe, but lucrative investments recently from which he expected 10% annual returns, outweighing the interest that they owed Bonilla. But let's stop there. We'll pick this back up a little later. For now, I'm going to tell you why I hate the Philadelphia Phillies. Let's fast forward to 2007. The Mets have a really good team. Back in 2006, they had several players who received MVP votes, including 4th place Carlos Beltran and 9th place David Wright. They made it all the way to the NLCS to face the Cardinals, where, unfortunately, they lost in heartbreaking fashion. Many Mets fans still see Carlos Beltran's strike 3 looking in their nightmares. Still, the Mets had a lot of reasons to feel good about their chances in 2007. Even if the roster was a bit older, many of their key pieces were still there, and pitchers Pedro Martinez and Orlando Hernandez were slated to come back after missing much of 2006 due to injury. The Mets got off to a hot start. By mid-season, David Wright looked like another strong MVP candidate. They beat up on the first-place Diamondbacks, they beat up on the first-place Cubs, and then from August 31st to September 12th, they went 10-2. So now it's September 14th, and the Mets look fantastic. After this early September stretch, it looks like they're going to cruise into the playoffs with just 17 games left to play. They're 83-62, 21 games over 500, and 7 full games ahead of the second-place Philadelphia Phillies. 7 games up, 17 left to play. 7 games up, 17 left to play. And the Mets now have a series against that second-place Phillies team. That's not great, but it's okay. A 3.5 game lead is still better than nothing. Let's see how, okay, we shouldn't be losing those games. Yes, okay, that's good, that's right. Let's get back on track. That's great. Oh dear, that didn't do much, did it? Oh no. This can't be happening. No. How did this happen? How is this happening? We were 7 up. We were 7 up on the Phillies with only 17 games left to play. How? 7 games up with 17 left to play. After being up 7 games with only 17 left to play, the Mets are now tied with Philadelphia atop the NL East. Since September 12th, the Phillies have gone 12-4. The Mets have gone 5-11. But that's the past. It all comes down to this. Game 162. New York Mets versus Florida Marlins. This is a must-win game for the Mets. A win and a Phillies loss puts them at the top of the division. In case the Phillies win, a Mets win will at least force a tiebreaker. If the Mets lose, their only hope for a tie is if the Phillies lose as well. It is a must-win situation. The Mets are starting Tom Glavine. Yes, the same Tom Glavine who shut us out in that 1998 game against the Braves. He's on the Mets now, and he has been since 2003. He actually had a great season just a year prior, being selected for the All-Star game and pitching 2 great games in the Mets playoff run. He also won his 300th game with the Mets back in August, a huge career milestone. Even though he hasn't been as good in 07 as he was in 06, Glavine wasn't one to shy away from a big moment. He was a big game pitcher. Furthermore, the Marlins were starting Dontrelle Willis, who had been struggling this season. They were also completely out of playoff contention, in last place, with nothing left to fight for at this point in the season. By all accounts, the Mets had set themselves up perfectly to win this game. So let's go. Glavine on the bump, let's do this. Back against the wall, let's win, right here, when it matters the most.
That we played without the wild card. Grounded to the hole and a base hit, and the Marlins take the early lead. Uggla comes in to score. It's an RBI single for Cabrera, his 119th run batted in, and Florida takes the early 1-0 lead. And Ross lifts one to right, a long run from Millage over toward the line. He won't get there, and it rolls all the way to the wall. Hermida will score. Cabrera is right on his heels and heading home. Castillo's throw. Castro can't handle it. Heading for third is Ross. Glavine makes the throw there and throws it into left field. Ross comes home to score, and it's 4-0 Florida. The wheels come off early. Wow. 1-2 to Willis. Breaking ball inside, and it hit him, and that forces in a run. And it's 5-0 Florida. And it just can't get any worse. 3-1 to Uggla. Ripped down the left field line. That'll get at least 2 more runs home. Trainer scores. De Aza scores. Willis to third. He'll be held up there. It's a 2-run double for Uggla. The Marlins have put up 7 runs in the top of the first inning. And the Mets are in danger of seeing their season end today.
What else really needs to be said here? I guess there's always next year. It's March 31st, 2008. Just like the Mets, the United States housing market had a brutal collapse last year. Now, U.S. stocks just had their worst January since 2000. The unemployment rate just eclipsed 5%. The banks are failing. Financial institutions are declaring bankruptcy left and right. The federal government is beginning to intervene. It's also opening day for the New York Mets. They're a little banged up right now from some off-season surgeries and spring training injuries. Looking to bounce back from last year, they're facing none other than the Florida Marlins. But this time, they win. Still, they get off to a slow start this year, largely due to these injuries. But as players start to come back, the Mets start to pick up the pace. By the end of July, the Mets are just one game back of the Phillies for the division lead. Also, by the end of July, with the unemployment rate now rapidly approaching 6%, the United States enacted the Housing and Economic Recovery Act of 2008, guaranteeing up to $300 billion in fixed-rate mortgages for subprime borrowers. It led directly to the federal takeover of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, two enterprises that specialized in repackaging subprime mortgage loans into tradable securities. Beyond the walls of Shea Stadium, the future of the Mets' own housing situation was unfolding. The Jackie Robinson Rotunda, the entrance to the Mets' own Citi Field that had been constructed over the past year, now sat across the left field parking lot as the rest of the new stadium was still being built. 2008 would be the last year that the Mets play at Shea. Between the construction of Citi Field and a brand new Yankee Stadium at the same time, New York taxpayers would pay $1.8 billion out of the $3 billion plus budget during the worst financial crisis of their lives. It's now September 10th. The Mets had a fantastic August, and so far, September as well. They're 3.5 games ahead of the Phillies for first place. There's just one problem. There's still 17 games left in the season. September 28th, the last day of the regular season. Despite blowing their division lead to the Phillies once again, they still have a chance at a playoff appearance. With a Mets win and a Brewers loss, they could secure the wildcard spot all to themselves. If both teams win, they at least force a tie. Let me also remind you, it's the Mets' last regular season game at Shea Stadium. They've called this ballpark home for the past 44 years. Playoff hopes aside, the Mets need to give Shea Stadium the send-off it deserves. One last postseason run. They cannot lose here. They absolutely, positively cannot lose here. But god damn it, it's Florida again. It's the Mets' own Oliver Perez versus Scott Olson. The Marlins get 2 runs off Perez in the 6th inning, but the Mets answer right back with a 2-run Beltran homer. A scoreless 7th follows. But then, back-to-back home runs from Wes Helms and Dan Uggla. The Mets just couldn't respond, their season dying on the warning track with Ryan Church's 9th inning liner. You know, earlier I called this section Why I Hate the Philadelphia Phillies, but it should really be Why I Hate the Florida Marlins. Or I guess both. 5 days later, President George W. Bush signed the Emergency Economic Stabilization Act of 2008, bailing out all of the banks and financial institutions that created the housing crisis in the first place. The unemployment rate is now at 6.5%. The first place Philadelphia Phillies win the World Series over the Tampa Bay Rays. Do you remember back in January 2000 when the Mets released Bobby Bonilla and they agreed to defer his contract to 2035 because they thought the investment returns they were getting would outweigh the interest that they paid? The investments that the Wilpons made were with one particular New York financier, someone that Fred Wilpon had been friends with for decades. His name was Bernie Madoff. On December 11th, 2008, Madoff was arrested on charges of securities fraud. He had been running the largest known Ponzi scheme in history. Any investments that people made with him were simply kept in a Chase business account, and when his clients requested redemptions of their alleged profits, he just withdrew the requested money from that account. All he had to do was keep recruiting investors, and as long as the money coming in was greater than the money coming out, he was golden. The problem was, as the financial crisis loomed, more and more of his clients requested larger and larger redemptions. By late November 2008, Madoff had just under $250 million in his account, but owed over $7 billion in redemptions. On December 9th, Madoff confessed to his two sons about his scheme, and they promptly turned him in to authorities. So, I know what you're thinking. How much did the Wilpons lose with Madoff? The answer is technically $0, and somehow it's actually so much worse than that. According to a 2010 lawsuit filed by Irving Picard on behalf of the victims of Madoff's investment scandal, in which Fred Wilpon was named as a defendant, the Wilpons made $300 million with Bernie Madoff. The lawsuit alleged that the Wilpons used Madoff funds to finance team payroll, minor league affiliates, and the creation of SNY and Citi Field. They settled 2 years later for $162 million. Additionally, even though the Wilpons were apparently net winners in the scandal, they still had $500 million in Madoff accounts when he was arrested. That money was now gone. The Mets, once a big market team consistently top 10 in payroll, would completely flip the script in the coming years. They even received their own bailouts a la the banks of the financial crisis. $25 million from MLB itself in 2010, and a $40 million loan from Bank of America in 2011, which was facilitated and monitored by MLB. Even so, by 2014, the team's payroll was down to just $89 million, ninth lowest in the league. It wasn't just the Mets' playoff hopes that collapsed in 2008. It was the entire Mets franchise. But hey, don't expect the 3.1 million Americans who lost their homes to cry much about it. Whenever Bobby Bonilla Day rolls around every July 1st, every baseball fan loves to say, LOL Mets, look at how horrible this contract is. Which I just think is incredibly reductive of what that day actually means to Mets fans. Every team has deferred contracts, some much more egregious than Bonilla's. Bobby Bonilla Day is awful because it is an annual reminder of some of the darkest and most embarrassing times in Mets history. Let's jump back to 2024. We last left off here, April 4th, where the Mets are 1-5 and only beaten out for the worst in their division by the 0-8 Marlins. But let's jump ahead to about a week and a half later. Oh? The Mets have gone 7-3 over the past 10 games and have finally crawled to 500. A win versus the Pirates the next day would put them at over 500 for the first time this season. Oh god, they're gonna get our hopes up, aren't they? Despite the Mets looking like a brand new ball club over this stretch, they'd be dealt some devastating news just a few days later. Catcher Francisco Alvarez has a torn ligament in his left thumb and would require surgery. He's gonna miss 6 to 8 weeks. It's hard to imagine a successful Mets team with the roster as currently constructed that doesn't have a healthy Francisco Alvarez. In just one full season, he's established himself as the Mets catcher of the future. It's a huge blow to the surging team. The Mets go on to play roughly 500 ball through the end of April, finishing the month 15-14. While the recovery has been impressive, and they've played great baseball against top teams like the Dodgers and interdivisional rival Braves, they're gonna have to be better than this if they have hopes for a playoff appearance. They have shown life, but that's about it. As the month came to a close, there was something that caught my attention while browsing the Mets subreddit. The Knuckles TV show, whose titular character is commonly known from the Sonic the Hedgehog franchise, had just released on Paramount Plus a few days ago, April 26, 2024. Apparently, there's a scene in the first episode where a character named, and I apologize if I'm butchering this, but Chief Pachacamac reads a newspaper and disgustedly says, "The Mets lost again." Well, whatever, I thought to myself. I've seen the Mets referenced as the butt of the joke many times over. But then another post caught my eye, almost directly after seeing the first one. Question I pose upon seeing the post about the Mets losing being in the new Knuckles show. The post continues. How many wins/winning records/chips would we need for our media references to be the Mets won again? This is not the most serious question, but the way we lose is pretty Mets, so what would a Mets win be like? Reading that post, I couldn't help but feel a little sad. It reads as innocent and naive, but also self-aware. I've never seen a Mets World Series win in my lifetime. Hell, I've only been old enough to remember one good playoff run. I couldn't help but feel like the scenario that person asked about would simply never happen. It just seems too impossible. Even if the Mets were to win 5 World Series titles in a row, if they fucked up the 6th in some bizarre and embarrassing way, it would still always be that the Mets are gonna Met.